Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for the Trade Quarter Enhancement Program Workshop. My name is Hannah Wilter, and I'm the manager of the Trade Quarter Enhancement Program. So before we get started, I'm going to let Kayla run over some webinar logistics. Kayla?
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. Currently, we don't have the agenda or the PowerPoint under the handouts tab. We had to make some changes to the PowerPoint, so that will be updated on our website in the next day or two. So if you do need it after the workshop, it will be available on our workshop's webpage. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio question and handouts tab. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. If you raise your hand to speak, please do not lower your hand until you are done making your comment. This helps us ensure you can be unmuted properly. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making your comments. Thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Kayla. All right, let's get started. So can we go to the next slide?
Yep, hang on, Hannah. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. 1 second.
No problem. Actually, Kayla, when you get there, you can just skip ahead. Oh yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So mainly we'll talk about the guidebook today and CEQA NEPA. I just wanted to clarify that really quick. For CEQA NEPA, the thing I wanted to mention was that last week in the workshop, I had said that I believe I said it was at the time of program adoption was the CEQA deadline, but I was wrong. It's actually 6 months from program adoption for both CEQA and NEPA. So Kayla, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I pasted it here again for you, but so for both CEQA and NEPA in this cycle 3, it's 6 months from program adoption. So that's good news. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? Okay, and thanks for the person who.
We do
Yeah,
have
I think we have a hand raised.
Oh, sure, yes.
Angel Pyle.
Hi, Hannah, this is Angel. I don't have a question, but I just want to say that I really appreciate the Commission's consideration in this, and just please extend my thanks to your management for allowing this particular cycle. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angel. Thanks for all of your work too on our behalf with the coordination. We appreciate it.
So no, oh, and thank you too. So anyway, just thanks.
Yeah.
We have one more hand raised. Huvin Alvarez.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. We want to echo the following pass comment. We in planning find that is extremely helpful to the applicants and to also in their process of putting their proposal forward. So yeah, we echo that past comment. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. And even though I know we have said that we will expect some more changes for the next cycle, please stay engaged with us on this issue so that we can continue to talk about it and make sure that we're coordinating with you on the future cycles too. Okay, so let's move on. So let's talk about the guidebook. The first thing I want to say about the guidebook is that it's not done. I mean, it is for now, but this is just the first iteration and what I'm hoping will be a continuously improving effort. So it's a starting point, but it's going to continue to improve over time, I hope. And the other thing I wanted to say is just thank you to everybody who helped out, whether you provided a review or gave some input on how to calculate something. There was so many people who really contributed to the guidebook, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to them. And there, you know, I can think of some people by name like Yoon Ma and Angel Pyle, Gilberto Chambers from the economics branch, Darren Conley, Torres, Tui Nugan. Those are just people I can think of that provided a lot of input into the guidebook, and I really appreciate them, but I know there are more. So I just wanted to take that moment to thank people. Okay, next slide, please. The guidebook was a work group process. We had 14 meetings over 7 months. There were about 45 experts from Caltrans and regional agencies who participated in the work group. We had subject matter experts review the metrics on a flow basis. And then once we had language for how to calculate each of them, we had a consultant who helped us put all of the metrics into one document. The only other thing I'll say about that is I do have some hard copies of the guidebook available, not that many, but a few. So if you're interested in a hard copy, then please reach out to me after this meeting. Okay, next slide, please. So the guidebook is meant to be a tool to help applicants to calculate the required metrics. We only focused on the required metrics in the guidebook. The thing I want to focus on in this slide is that it's up to the applicant to choose how to calculate each metric. You do not have to do the calculations we included in the guidebook. It's not a requirement. It's only meant to assist. There's only a couple exceptions I can think of to that. And the first is that there are general parameters, which are on a slide in a minute, that talk about things like, are we requiring both the build and the no build, or just the no build for cycle 3? Are we looking for year 20 or are we looking for year 1? Like that kind of thing. Those parameters you need to follow, but when it comes to actually calculating it, you can choose another way if you don't like the guidebook's way. The other thing I can think of is for solutions for congested corridors and local partnership, if your project is on the state highway system, then for vehicle miles traveled metric, you have to collaborate with Caltrans on that metric. But I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about that today because that's not a TSIP required metric. Okay, let's keep moving on. So just one quick note that the performance metrics and the evaluation criteria are not exactly the same thing. Think of the performance metrics as a subset of the evaluation criteria. And for trade corridors, all of the metrics are also evaluation criteria, but there are evaluation criteria that are not performance metrics. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a look at the metrics included in the guidebook. These are only the required metrics, and this is a list of all of them. And you can see that there are some that are required for all of the SB1 programs and some that are only required for trade corridors or only required for local partnership and solutions for congested corridors. We're just focusing on the trade corridor ones today. So these include things like change in truck and rail volume, change in daily truck hours of delay. Those are examples. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, can you go back to that slide really quick? Sorry. See that bullet at the bottom on the right? We wanted to note that we're including accessibility, equity, climate change, and public health in the application form, but we didn't include them as performance metrics. And the reason for that was when we were looking at just because something can be quantified and just because we may want it to be quantified for the application doesn't mean it's the best candidate to be a performance metric. For performance metrics, we really wanted to stick with things that where there was a relatively consistent formula that could be applied across multiple project types. So that's what we were looking for when we decided which ones to include as performance metrics. Accessibility, for example, is something that we have in the guidebook as a criteria, and we're asking applicants to quantify accessibility, but we're giving them different options about how they may want to quantify it. So there's not one consistent way that you can do it. So if it was more nuanced like that, we did not include it as a performance metric. Okay, let's keep going.
Hannah, we received a question really quick just on this topic. So
sure.
Will we be sharing the link to the guidebook?
Oh, yes, we can send, Kayla, do you mind after this meeting if you send a link to the PowerPoint, can you send a link to the guidebook too, to the group? We'll send that to you one way or another, however we get it out to you. Yeah. Okay, next slide. All right, so there's a table at the beginning of the guidebook that shows you what the metrics are on the left and then the programs that they're required for and the project types that they're required for. So for example, if you're looking at the air quality metric that's down on the bottom there, third one from the bottom, that one is required for all programs and all project types. But if you're looking for at level of transit delay, for example, it's about the fourth one down from the top in the list. That one's only required for solutions for congested corridors and local partnership, and it's only required for transit projects. So that's just trying to give you a high level look at the applicability of the different metrics. Next slide. This is the general guidance I was talking about that you do need to follow for each of the metrics. And these little boxes are in one table at the beginning of the guidebook, but they're also at the top of each metric when it explains how you can calculate them. So it has the metric on the left. It tells you the program it's required for in the next column. Then it's telling you whether it's looking for an average annual number or a daily number, because there's both. And we wanted to make sure everyone was looking at that consistently. And then it's telling you if we're looking for year 20 or the most current year that you have available. And then it's telling you which columns are required. So if in the performance metrics form, in the EPPR and in the narrative, there's the no build column, so without the project, the build column, so with the project, and then the change or the difference between the two. For different metrics, we're requiring different things. Some of them, a lot of them, most of them, we're requiring all three, but then there's some of them where we're only requiring one of those columns. So we're clarifying that here. Are there any questions about that before we move on?
Hey, Hannah, yes, we do have a hand raised. Carrie Cartwright, I've unmuted you.
Yeah, hi Hannah. I noticed in the guidebook that it states for cycle 3, the truck travel time reliability index is not required, correct? Just want to verify that.
That's true, and that's because, so I would really like applicants to provide it because I think it's one of the most important trade corridor metrics. The reason that we decided not to make it required for cycle 3 only is because if you recall, when we were in the work group for these metrics, we had said that we were only going to require the no build for cycle 3 for all the programs because it's very difficult to forecast some of those one-off events that reliability is trying to measure. We based our calculation on the federal performance metric that's required. And for the regular vehicles, we were able to make a crosswalk so that we can actually use the information that Caltrans is required to submit to the feds every year for the NPM RDS data set. And so crosswalk it with the post mile so that applicants can just look up their project by post mile and then automatically find the maximum travel time reliability number and plug that into the no build. And I was under the impression that that crosswalk had included the same thing for truck travel time reliability because that's a little bit different because they divide the 95th percentile by the 50th. But we apparently don't have that crosswalked yet. And so I didn't want to make it required for people in this cycle, but I'm still going to go over it. It's the one metric that I included in the guidebook that is not actually required because I would like people to try to calculate it if possible. But because we don't have that crosswalk done yet, it's not required.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll probably follow up with more questions as we get closer and into the actual application period. And also a lot of some of the segments aren't even probably in the Caltrans reporting system anyway, I would imagine. So you could even compute it based upon the prescribed approach, but you know, it could encourage applicants to recommend a different approach, you know, such as if they're doing I mean, it's very similar in modeling where you estimate the change in travel speed, and you could probably come up with some reliability quasi-index based upon change in travel speed, which is going to be reported anyway in the application of vehicle hours travel. So.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually be, and we can talk about it when we get there, but it's fairly, I don't want to say easy, but you know, there's a way to calculate the truck route reliability because all you would have to do is estimate travel speeds in 15-minute increments along your segment for like say one time period. Well, you could do it for all of the I think 5 or 6 time periods for freight because there's different time periods for freight than there are for the regular traffic. But you could, you just need to estimate the 15-minute increments for those time periods and then calculate the percentile and divide, and then you have your answer. So if you have the ability to get travel speeds or an estimate of travel speeds on your segment, which you're right, you'd have to do anyway, then you would have a way to get the number. And you wouldn't have to really do all of the time periods if you didn't want to. You could just pick one, like the peak period. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Oh, do you want to take this hand or?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay. Jennifer Farinas.
Oh, yes. Hi, Hannah, and thanks for conducting the workshop today. I just had a question on the guidebook. So if we elect to use a different metric and then the guidebook is in place for a certain, metric, at the time of auditing, is it going to be an issue that the agency decided to use a different metric when the guidebook is in place? I'm just wondering because through TCIF, we had some changes in the metrics that were used, and when auditing came up, there was some discussions that need to occur between staff and Caltrans. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question. And while I can't, I can't say for certain what the auditor will do, but I understand because of what you're saying, we try to articulate in the guidebook in more than one spot. So at the beginning, but also throughout the guidebook, that whether if you choose to use a different method, that's allowable. You just have to document your assumptions and your methodology. So we did actually put that in multiple places in the guidebook. So if that does come up, then hopefully you can point them to the guidebook and say, no, it says right here, you don't have to use this methodology. You can use your own methodology as long as you provide the basis for that. So hopefully that will help mitigate some of those issues. Are there any other questions? Okay,
No more hands, yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Okay, there is backup information required. And as a reviewer, if a reviewer has a question about one of your performance metrics numbers, you have to keep in mind that reviewers are probably reviewing around 5 applications in a week, and we're doing it in addition to our regular work. So our time, we have to manage it. So when we have a question about one of the numbers provided, it's important that we're able to look at a place in your application where we can try to easily understand what you were doing there. And so that's why we've put together this required backup information form that asks for specific information we'd like to see for how you calculated each metric. And the way the form is laid out is it has the metric name and at the top, and then it asks you what your source data was for the metric. Then it's asking you, so what were your base numbers? And if you trended the number forward, how did you do that? That's what it's looking for. So I'm trying to think of a good, well, there's an example in here. So for example, if you were trying to show your backup for daily vehicle hours of delay, then you would want to show, okay, well, I used the CalBC sketch model. Here's the tab where I got my numbers. And then I calculated, the no build by taking the no build average travel time minus the speed limit for the average, well, yeah, that's just the free flow, and then getting the difference. So anyway, I'm not going to try to walk myself back through this calculation that I put as an example, but it basically is asking you to explain how you calculated it for no build and build. I'm trying to see the bottom there and the change for an example. Anyway, so I'm not gonna, are there any questions on that one, on the backup form? Also, if you don't like this form and you think of a better way to say it for the future, then let me know, because we can change this form in the future. This is just what we came up with for this year cycle. Any questions on that?
Hannah, we have a hand. Go ahead, Celeste.
Yes, James Faber, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. James, you're unmuted. Maybe it was accidental. James? Faber? Okay.
All right, well, he can always raise his hand again later if he wants to. Okay, let's move on. So these are the performance metrics that apply to all three of the programs. And I put kind of like a generalized formula in the middle there. And then one of the main sources that we're recommending using in the guidebook. One of the reasons that we went with the sketch model so often is that we know that most applicants are familiar with filling that out and already have to fill it out for one reason or another. So it was something we felt like was fairly usable for most people. So the first one is air quality, and that's basically the change in tons of particulates. And we're looking at it over 20 years is that one. Then there's the cost benefit ratio, where you're basically adding up the total benefits and dividing it by the total cost to see what your return on investment is. And then safety, that's one that's a little harder to articulate in a simple way, but essentially, first what you need to do is find the rate of fatalities and serious injuries, and then you just multiply that by 1 million, or I'm sorry, first you find the number, and then you get the rate per 1 million. And then for jobs created, that's a federal formula that we used, and it ends up being really easy to calculate because you're using the total, you're using up, 0.000013 of a person for every project dollar. So it's a fairly easy calculation. But I'm going to go into these in a little more detail below. So we can go to the next slide. Oh, this is just telling you, these are just examples. This isn't the whole methodology for each one. I'm just trying to highlight it so it doesn't take up too much time. But feel free to ask questions. So for air quality, okay, so as you can see, this number that we're highlighting here is pulling the total over 20 years. So, and the emissions that are on, this is from the CalBC model, actually from the results tab, from the sketch model. And it's pulling the total over 20 years, and the emissions that are listed on the left there are the same emissions that are required in the performance metrics form. So the CalBC model is probably what you're used to using actually to estimate emissions impacts, and it's a good place to get this metric. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So what it does, and I copied that first piece along the top to try to explain, is that it calculates based on your total VMT, your tons of emissions saved, your tons per year, and then it converts those emissions saved into dollars. So it's basically looking at how based on the VMT that goes through your project segment, how much emissions would you have in a no build scenario over 20 years ultimately, and then how much would you have in a build scenario, and so how much are you saving, and then it monetizes it. So that's what the CalBC model does for you once you put in the base numbers for that, which is like your total VMT. And there's a whole other section that the guidebook covers for the project input tab in the sketch model, which is the input data that you need. And so that's actually in the guidebook. And I know that the economics branch sometimes helps people fill out those tabs too if they need help with that. But PM10 and PM 2.5 are split out in the performance metrics form as emissions that you have to report on separately. And so the guidebook shows you how to go to the emissions tab to get that number, because the final results tab is basically just pulling from this tab, and then this tab splits it out. So you can kind of see, you can pull the two separate numbers there. And that's what this is showing you how to do. And the guidebook shows you how to do that. And the guidebook uses MFAC information for the emissions. So that's what it's using as the base. Are there any questions on this metric?
Hi, Hannah. I'm not seeing any written questions. We did have a hand raised, but they lowered it. So I think nothing right now.
Okay. Yeah, if you were going to try to calculate this without using the CalBC sketch model, I imagine that you would have to look at the emissions in CARB's MFAC model, but I don't want to speculate about how you might want to do that right now. Okay, let's keep moving.
Actually, Hannah, it looks like we do have a hand raised again. I'll turn it to Celeste.
Sure.
Thanks, Kayla. James Faber. It looks like there are two James Fabers in our attendees list, so this could be the reason why you are not able to speak. Okay, I suggest sending your question in the questions tab.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the cost benefit ratio. This one, when you say it as a calculation, is fairly easy, but I'm sure that when it comes to gathering information, it takes some time. But basically, if you're we're recommending in the guidebook that you use the CalBC model. So what the CalBC model does is it captures the total user benefits in constant dollars for travel time savings, vehicle operating cost savings, accident reductions, and vehicle emissions reductions. And those are the benefits that it's capturing for the numerator of the equation. If you want to add additional benefits, like we've talked about in some of the other workshops, if you want to monetize something related to zero emissions infrastructure that might not be, your regular travel time savings, but is looking at something else, then you might want to take the information that the CalBC model can provide you automatically, and then also add in some of your own information. But right now, what the guidebook is recommending you use is the CalBC model, and it's fairly easy to use for this because it calculates the information automatically, and then it puts the answer in its final results tab. So that's just showing you the image on this slide is showing you the box in the model where it can be found. Okay, so for safety, what you really need to do first is you need to find the accident, the fatality and serious injury rate. So I shouldn't say that you need to do that first. What you need to do first is actually find the number of fatalities and the number of serious injuries over 5 years. So that's actually the first part. I take back what I said about the rate. Because there's actually 4 boxes or 4 metrics in the performance metrics form for safety. It looks like this. You'll see number of serious injuries, number of fatalities, rate of serious injuries, and rate of fatalities. And those are all under the general category of safety. So to get the number of serious injuries and the number of fatalities, if it's a Caltrans project, then there's a form that you can fill out, and it's in the guidebook, where you can request that Caltrans staff actually pull that information for you. And it's over the most current 5 years available. So that's what you're going for, just the most current 5 years that you can get information for. So if it's a Caltrans project, you can ask them to pull it for you. If it's not a Caltrans project, then you have two options. And I hope in the future that this is a little different. But for now, if you're not a Caltrans project, you have to submit a Public Records Act request and ask the Caltrans staff to provide that information for you, and they will. And they said that they believe that for SB1 programs, they should be able to do that fairly quickly. Or you can also go to a CHP website that has that information. And I've included the link for you and some basic instructions. Just so you know, that website is a little hard to get access to. So if you have any problems, it's good to email the contact that they have listed on their website. But when using CHP data or Caltrans data or some of your own data, if you have that for your project, it should be fairly simple to get the number of fatalities and serious injuries over 5 years. And then what you do once you have that number is you just divide it by 5. And that's the number that goes into the number of fatalities and number of serious injuries. And then to estimate that for future years, that's where you need to start looking at this next calculation where I'm talking about the rate group. So let me explain this for a minute. Okay, so there's basically a way that you can estimate improvements in safety, because I know that's a difficult thing to do, using some general assumptions that Caltrans makes about the impact that safety features of their projects will have on the number of serious injuries and fatalities. But if you're going to use that information, you first need to look at the rate that's in the CalBC model. So what you need to do first is you have to, there's a, right now the most current version is from 2018. It's a traffic collision data, and it's Caltrans data. So based on some of the aspects of your project, like facility type and AADT, you have to find where that project fits. And then you have to multiply it. You have to add in an AADT factor as well. But once you have that rate and you know what that is, you start with that. So in this example, it looks like the base rate for this project is 0.78. It's rate group H01. So you start with a certain rate, and that is actually in the CalBC model, and the guidebook shows you where it is. Then you look at some documents that you can find online, and the guidebook references these two, and actually it includes them. We pasted them into the guidebook for you. And actually, can you go to the next slide? Okay. And so you can estimate a reduction in the rate using some of these safety features. So for example, so this is a piece of a chart called Collision Reduction Factors for Highway Safety Projects. And so it's showing you what the type of safety improvement is, and then how much, like what percent they believe that this will reduce the collisions. So I advise you to be a little conservative when you're applying these. But for example, if your project was putting in a new signal, then you could estimate up to, say, a 20% reduction in your future collision rate using this information as a base for your reasoning. So what you would need to do is take the collision rate that's in the guidebook and reduce it by 20%. So that would be an example of how you could use these reduction factors to reduce your build number of collisions. If you wanted to reduce them down, you could say reduce them by 20% using this information. And it would apply to both, you could apply that to actually both the number and the rate. I'm trying to summarize it for you. This is one of the more detailed calculations, but hopefully the main takeaway that I want you to have from this is that there is sourced information out there for the safety calculation. The number is fairly easy to do, and the rate is actually fairly easy to do if once you have gathered the right pieces of information for your project. It's just walking through the steps. And it's good that we found these examples. So there's this one that I put in the presentation, but there's also another document that we reference in the guidebook that you can use to just help you have an idea of how the different features of your project might improve safety. So that's the other good thing that I wanted to highlight, is that the guidebook actually has some examples that you could use to kind of help you make some of those assumptions about the build number that might have been lacking before. That's the main takeaway I really want you to have from this. Are there any questions on the safety calculation?
Hi, Hannah. We do have a handful of written questions and comments, and then a couple of hands raised. So I'm going to go through the questions, and then I'll turn it to Celeste when we're done.
Okay, sounds good.
So our first question is from Joseph Stramaglia. This is regarding the CalBC model and smaller agencies partnering with Caltrans district staff engineering. They said in the past, Proposition 1B use of the BC model was exclusively done by Caltrans. Has the CTC considered that requirement? And he also gave more of a comment. During implementation of Proposition 1B, regions were not allowed to generate a CalBC analysis, but only Caltrans in order to promote consistency and minimize abuse of the tool. Projects were ranked based on the BC outcome.
Well, if someone from the economics branch is on this call, they can feel free to weigh in. But my understanding from talking with the economics branch staff is that applicants, because all the CalBC sketch model is available online, you just have to, go on there and download it. And I think that the expectation is that applicants will fill this out themselves, and that they will rely on the instructions in the guidebook. But I also know that the economics branch staff is available to help, especially with the initial inputs, if you need help with the project information tab. Because once you have those that base information in there, it does all the calculations for you automatically. So it should, some of the information in the project information tab are things that I think would be pretty readily available to most applicants. But if you have any questions, because I've tried to fill that tab out myself and it can be confusing, then I know that the economics branch staff are available to help. But if Gilberto or Tui or anyone else from there is on this call and wants to say something different, then go ahead.
Okay, Hannah, while we wait to see if any of their hands are raised, I do have one more written question. This is from Eric Fredericks. Is adding truck parking one of the reduction factors in the guidance in terms of reducing collisions?
It's not specifically mentioned in the guidebook, but you could add it. But that's a good thing to bring up, because that could improve safety in a project. And so you could include that as a feature that you're assuming will decrease collisions or fatalities. You just have to note that. So for this metric and for all the metrics, we try to repeat that, because especially the build numbers are always going to include an estimate of the impact your project is going to have. And so we always say, you know, if we're trying to provide you with some tools or examples that you could use to estimate your project impacts, but if you don't want to use those and you have some other good information that you want to use, you're more than welcome to use it. We just ask that you explain, like in that example, you would say, well, we have some truck parking that we believe is going to impact this this project segment, and this is how much of a reduction we assumed it would have in the number of collisions and fatalities. So something like that. You know, actually that made me think of to the person who commented at the beginning about auditing at the end. One thing we did also write in the beginning of the guidebook was that in an audit, the version of the guidebook, the version of the CalBC model that a person uses, or the version of the source documents, even if it's a local model that the person uses when they create these metrics, should be the version that the auditors they're allowed to use at the end, because these are all estimates over 20 years sometimes. And so we wanted to just note that the model itself, the CalBC model or your own travel demand models, are going to change over time. So we should really be evaluating them in light of the version that people used when they were originally making these estimates.
Thanks, Hannah. I'll turn it to Celeste to take care of the hands raised.
Thanks, Kayla. James Faber, I've unmuted you. Let me try unmuting your second name. Maybe that will work.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Thank you.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was trying to talk to you and I couldn't, obviously, so thank you.
Did you have a question, James, or?
Not yet, but I may. I'm good so far. Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad that you can. Okay, good. Can hear you now. That's good.
Hannah, this is Kayla. We did receive one more written question.
Okay, sure.
They asked, will sketch model work for a rail crossing project?
Rail crossing. Well, I guess it depends. Some of the pieces will work, but there's not a lot of rail. I should have opened my sketch model for this meeting. There's not a lot of rail information actually captured in the sketch model right now, but I'm trying to think about how that will be applicable to the metrics. So you should be able to, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that because I can't remember what, like in order to make it work, you would have to, the travel time savings tab would have to factor that in. And I can't remember all the project types that it has. So let me get back to you on that one.
Thanks, Hannah. That's it for written questions and not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, so these are the trade corridor metrics these are only applicable to trade corridor. So the first one is change in daily vehicle hours of delay. And so change in daily vehicle hours of delay and change in daily truck hours of delay really go together. The only reason that we required both is because we thought it might actually be in the applicant's benefit to show both, since sometimes, you know, your change might not make a huge increase in truck hours of delay, but it might make a big impact in vehicle hours of delay. Or sometimes your project might make a big difference in both. So we just wanted to be able to see the whole picture. So that's why we required both, but both of them look at vehicle volumes times the travel time, like during your congested flow minus the free flow time. And then it's a daily metric, so you divide by 365. So that's the general formula. Okay, let's see. Oh, and then change in truck volume. Sorry, Kayla. Change in truck volume. This one, you could either use the AADT information that Caltrans has online, or you could use the vehicle volume that's in the CalBC model, either one, or you could use your own, like if you have a travel demand model or some of your own truck volume information from somewhere, then you can use that. And then you can either just, if you're using Caltrans's AADT numbers from online, then they have a file that's specific to trucks and you can just use that. So you'd use that as the base for the no build and then you'd estimate the change with your project. If you're using the CalBC model and you're just using vehicle volume, then you either need to use the truck, there's a box that is specifically for truck peak period, and you would either need to use that or you would need to use the regular flow and multiply it times the truck percent. So there's several different ways that you could get at the volume, but basically you're just, for change in truck volume, you're just measuring the volume of trucks that flow through your project area without the project and the volume of trucks that flow through your project area with the project. And this is one of the metrics that I weighted more heavily in the last cycle because I think it's really important one for freight. Change in rail volume is exactly the same, but instead of counting the number of trucks, you're just counting the number of trains or the number of rail cars. The only thing that makes rail difficult is I really had a hard time. I looked a lot, and I mean, like I said, we had a work group of 45 members, experts with data, but it is very hard to find rail information anywhere. So if you are doing a project where you own the right of way, then you probably are going to be able to get that those volume numbers. If you don't own the right of way, then you're either going to have to ask the rail company that you're working with for that information. Or the only other thing I could come up with, and you'll see the slide for it in a minute, is that the state rail plan has some estimates of rail volume that you could maybe use. But those are the only two solutions I could think of. So actually, if you have a project where you don't own the right of way and you're trying to get the information, if you end up finding a better source than either the rail company itself or the rail plan estimates, then I'd be interested to hear what that is. And then truck travel time reliability, we've already talked about that a little bit, but essentially in order to do that calculation, we don't have a crosswalk for you for trade corridors. We do for solutions for congested corridors and local partnership. So if you want to do that calculation, you're going to have to estimate travel time over your segment in 15-minute increments and then divide the 95th percentile of those times by 50th. I can talk about it in a minute. And then velocity, the change in velocity is basically just speed times distance without the project and with the project. And those are the general formulas. I can show you a little more specifically some of the highlights of some of these. So we can move to the next slide.
Hannah, do you mind taking some questions right now? We have a hand raised.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead, Celeste.
Thank you. Nadaraja, I've unmuted you.
Hi, Hannah. The velocity that you are going at this point, is it the truck velocity, or are we talking about overall the routes, that particular corridor velocity?
That's a really good question.
Some of the lanes can, because the trucks normally stay on the right lanes, and then, or do you want kind of an average for that one?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's an area of ambiguity in the guidebook that we didn't specify. So like if you're just taking that at face value, then it would be all the lanes that are flowing through that segment. But if you wanted to provide just the truck velocity, then you could do that and just tell me that it's only the truck velocity that you're providing. It'll be okay because trade corridors is the only one that has this metric anyway. So as long as you tell me that it's the truck velocity, it'll be fine.
Yeah, the truck velocity, that particular lane will be really difficult to calculate. So overall will be the easier one for the normal, any other modeling to calculate. Thank you.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that makes sense. But that makes sense. But that makes me wonder if you were calculating it for everything and then trying to isolate the truck, what would you do? Would you just use a truck percent, or would you, because I'm assuming that, I think that's actually what the CalBC model does. Like if you're using the sketch model and you're looking on the travel time tab and you're looking at truck peak period, because that's specific to trucks. I imagine they may be just taking the regular traffic and multiplying it.
Yeah, that's normally the microsim or modeling will give us that one, or the travel demand model will give us the overall corridor speed. And if we need to isolate it to that particular lane, then we might have to do a microsim modeling, so which is probably a little time consuming, but we can see.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably, if you leave it as is, just leave it like this one, then it's good.
Okay. All right, that's good to know.
At least we can calculate it and provide it for the applications. Yeah.
Okay, then that's good insight. Thank you. One thing I'm hoping will happen, since we have some of these ideas on paper, is that if we ever, maybe it will help if people find good ways to do things, then please let me know. Or if we develop a more accessible way, because like how many of us can really do a micro simulation model? We might not have those resources, but if we find a better way that we could get the input data that we needed to do a velocity for just trucks, then that would be great. So I'm hoping that over time our tools will get better. Okay, let's keep moving. Are there any other questions?
Hi, Hannah. We did receive one more written question from James Faber. This is for a project that's a rail crossing safety project that will address fatalities and improve rail reliability. They want to know which matrix elements would not apply to such a project.
To know that, I would have to go back to the beginning because I can't remember offhand and look at the chart that shows you the project types that the metrics apply to. It was one of the very first slides. Maybe we can go back there really quick. Sorry.
Let me know when to stop, Hannah, because there's a lag, I think, from me changing the slides. So.
Okay, sure. No, I think it's the one before this one. Yeah, you can stop. Okay, so let's look, because the ones that are applicable to rail are actually in there, and there's not that many of them because we had such a hard time with the source data. So it looks like the metrics applicable to rail would be change in rail volume, velocity, so that one is applicable to rail, air quality, cost effectiveness, the benefit cost ratio, and jobs created. So those are the, did I say them all? Air quality, yeah. So those are the metrics applicable to rail. The other ones would not be required for rail projects because if we had a real hard time finding the info we'd need to calculate them, we didn't make it required.
Thanks, Hannah. That's all we have.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all we have for written questions and hands raised.
Okay, let's go back. Thanks for jumping around there.
Is this where we were?
No, it's after that. Keep going, keep going. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. So this is just showing you for vehicle hours of delay or truck hours of delay. If you're using the CalBC sketch model, you can basically calculate it in the travel time tab, and there's some columns that I'm showing you there. There's the average volume with no build and build, and then the average speed with no build and build. So you just take the number for the vehicle volume times the average speed, and then you would multiply those and minus the free flow time, and then you would divide by 365. So that's, you just pull the numbers from the travel time tab. Or if you have your own numbers, you can use it. Oh, and see how I highlighted truck peak period? That's the box I was referring to in the travel time tab. So the guidebook explains this and it's near the beginning, but in where some of this information is that you pull from in the travel time tab and in other tabs, but I'm thinking specifically of the travel time tab, it actually has different boxes. So it has highway type at the across the top, like in the at the beginning, it goes from left to right and it'll say like highway project, transit project. And so it tells you the main type of project. And then if you scroll down on the spreadsheet, it'll show you the regular peak period or peak period truck. And then there's a lot of other categories too. I just can't think of them right now. So it's good to look in to scroll down and not just use the boxes you see at the top, because there might be one that's more applicable to your project type. Okay, we can keep going. Okay, so this is just showing you an example. This is actually an example of if you're going to use the AADTT data that's online from Caltrans, then this is what it looks like. And the link to the website is in the guidebook, but you basically go to the traffic operations area of Caltrans's website, and then there's different documents listed, and I recommend using, well, there's one for all traffic and one for truck traffic, so you need to use the truck traffic. And then I recommend using the Excel version. So you go into there, and they just posted a more updated one, which is good. And then like in this example, I've pasted what the document looks like. So once you find your segment by looking at the post miles there on the left in like columns E and F, then you would, and the title of the project is in there too in column I, then you would go over and in column J, it shows the, or I'm sorry, in column K, it shows the truck AADT total. So that's what you would use. And if you have a project that has more than one segment, like pretend it has more than one row, then what I would do is add them. Or you might have to like make some estimate of splitting one of the numbers out into pieces if only a percent of, if your project covers some piece of that, but I'll leave that to you guys to figure out. Okay, so let's keep moving. Oh, I just wanted to highlight really quick that I think most people are familiar with this, but in case you're not, the guidebook does have a part that shows you how to trend forward using a percent. Basically, you take the base year and then you multiply times a certain percent to get a new number, to get a number, and then you add that number into the base number. And then you build off that number each year. So it shows you how to do that. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, this is an example of one of the tables in the state rail plan that has some estimates about like this. In this example, it's base year freight train volume adjustment factors. And so I don't know, I think there was a study done and that's where this information came from. Some of you might know more than I do, but it shows you the rail corridor location on the left, and the has more information in the middle, and then it has some assumptions on the right. So the forecast year is, it looks like it's the 2040 to 2007 ratio. So there's actually a few different tables that have different information, but you can refer to these if you absolutely cannot get a better source of information. The other thing about these is that I don't think it covers the whole state. I think most of these example, most of these are from Southern California, but it's the only other thing we could find. So those are actually in an appendix at the end of the guidebook if you need to use them, or you could look online in the state rail plan. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, this is the thing about reliability. This is one of the things I updated because I realized that I actually had an example from the federal instructions that was the part about calculating the volume instead of the speed. So I changed the example. But essentially, okay, so for freight, there's the 5 time periods over there on the bottom left. So you have, you know, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then it keeps going. Okay, so all we're requiring is, the thing about reliability is that when they submit it to the feds for the NPM RDS data set, National Performance Metrics Research Data Set is, I believe, what that stands for. When they submit it to the feds, what the feds do with it, the calculation they use is actually looking at the whole state. And so what they do is they basically find the well, okay, let me explain something else first. Let me back up. What reliability is trying to measure is it's trying to measure the impact of random events on the system. So it's trying to figure out when was your segment most reliable. And then what it's doing is, what the overall big federal state calculation is doing is it's looking at the reliability of your segment, like when it was unreliable versus unreliable, and then it's comparing it to all the segments in the state to see how it measures up against everything else. That's what the overall calculation does. But for the purposes of our metric, what we were asking you to do is find the maximum travel time reliability or truck travel time reliability for trade corridors within the 5 time periods. And so we're asking you to find what that maximum truck travel time reliability is for the no build, and then estimate the project impacts under the build. But like I said, since we don't have all the resources for you, it's not required for this cycle. But if you were going to do it, what you would need to do is you'd need to, for example, if you were going to do it for the 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. time period on the weekdays, right? Then you'd need to estimate the speed of traffic through your project segment in 15-minute increments during that time period. So 15-minute, if you did that, then you would come up with a list of 16 numbers. And so you'd come up with that list of 16 numbers. Then you would order it from smallest to biggest. After you did that, you would multiply 50% times 16, which is 8. And so then you would look for the 8th number in your list. Then you do the same thing for 95%, which is like 15, the 15th number in your list. Okay, and so once you knew what your 50th percentile and 95th percentile was, you would divide the 95th percentile by the 50th percentile, and you would find, and then that's going to give you your reliability. So that's how you calculate it for one time period. You can, since it's not required, if you want to do it, you can either just pick your busiest time period. That's what I would do. Because if you want to show change, then you're going to want to pick your busiest period for no build so that you can show impacts in the build scenario. But you can just do one time period and you can do that calculation. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so velocity is speed times distance. And so in the beginning of the CalBC sketch model, if you're using that, you already have to put in the distance of your project anyway, it's in there. So you just take that number, and it's in box 1B, and you multiply it by the average speed under build and no build, and that's how you can get your number for that metric. Okay, let's keep going. And then I'm not going into these today, but these are metrics that are specific to solutions for congested corridors and local partnership. You've got person hours of travel time saved, which the CalBC sketch model automatically calculates for you. Peak period travel time reliability, we do have a crosswalk for that one, so the travel time reliability is already calculated. Level of transit delay, which is an interesting one. We're using GTFS RT data. That's some location-based data that Caltrans is working with transit agencies to provide. So you're only required to do this one if you actually have that information. And then change in daily VMT. There's like 5 ways that we're offering to calculate VMT in the guidebook, but I won't go into that here. Okay, let's keep going. That's the end. So are there any questions?
Hi, Hannah. Yeah, we do have one written question so far. This is from James Schenkel. Regarding previous rail question, to confirm, in addition to the 5 metrics identified under rail project types, would the all program type metrics such as number of fatalities and number of serious injuries and rates of fatalities and rate of serious injuries also apply to rail project types? It is noticed that rail type projects appears to be the only project type that does not match with the metrics checked for all program types.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I'm gonna have to get back to you in a future workshop because I see what you're saying, that we had that list of, which I actually just made for this presentation, but that list of the metrics that apply to all programs. And then you're noting that the safety is on there, but then it's not checked in rail. So the guidebook doesn't actually have the metrics broken up how I did it for the presentation. It just has the main list. So if you were only reading the guidebook, you would just see that it wasn't applicable to rail. And that's because we couldn't find good source information for rail. So like, for example, the source data that we use for safety is coming from Caltrans highway collision data or CHP collision data, but those are all on the highways. We cannot find, so source data for rail that we could use for safety. So if anyone has that, then please let me know. It's not something we could find during the process, so that's why we didn't require safety for rail projects. But you could provide that information for rail projects if you can find a way of getting it. That's so I guess I did answer your question, but that's the answer.
Thanks, Hannah. I don't have any written questions and I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay, well, I hope this was helpful. It's hard to explain sometimes, but please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you have any ideas for how to make the guidebook better. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thanks admin team for your help. I think you can end the webinar whenever, Kayla.